When my dad first told me this story as a kid, it gave me chills, so I thought that I might as well share. I still remember every detail. Before going into the details, I'll give you some context to set the setting and background of the incident. Bear with me, they totally add to the scary element of the story. Back in 1985, my 19-year-old dad was serving in the Greek Army Special Forces in the Paratrooper Division. It's kind of irrelevant, but I'm a proud son, so I thought I would mention it. Army service in Greece is mandatory for every male that had reached their 18th birthday, and so everybody has to go. Military camps where each company is stationed at are mostly positioned in the countryside, and usually there isn't much going on near and around the camp. They're fairly secluded. The closest town to my pop's camp was 3 kilometers away. One night while serving, it was my dad's turn to go on guard duty in the camp that he was posted in. Every night, 5 or 6 soldiers were selected for guard duty and they slept in the same barracks. About a half hour before it was time for the previous guards to be relieved, another soldier would come in the room and wake up the new batch so that they would get ready and go to their positions. Each shift was 2 hours. The 12 to 6 a.m. shifts were the worst according to my pops. It would get extremely cold in the winter and you're half asleep, standing beside your booth, freezing your butt off while keeping watch. Only way to be vigilant and keep warm is to take a few steps up and down. So, it was around 2 a.m. and my dad was standing next to his booth with his M1. It was absolutely silent. He could only hear the wind. He mentioned that the moon was helpful with visibility, but there's so much that you can make out at night, even with the moon apart from dark shadows, especially at longer distances. There were some tree lines far away, but there wasn't much vegetation around the camp at all. It was more like a clearing. Everything was going well like every other night, until a tall, dark mass appeared from the path coming out of a tree line, and it headed right towards my father's booth. My dad's heart starts pumping when he spots it, and he says that he's scared out of his mind at this point. The mass moves slow but steady and is closing the distance, almost like floating with big, slow steps. My dad does what he's instructed to do and what every other guard does in a situation like this. Raises his rifle, aims and screams, "Halt, identify yourself." But no reply. The shadow continues to approach. Second time, "Halt, identify yourself." Nothing. He told me that at this point he's almost certain that he's seeing a ghost. He says that he thought to himself, "Let's see if a ghost can die." Before he engaged, he has to scream a code word that raises the alarm. And the way that works is, the next guard in the next booth, that's about 100 meters away, will hear the scream, then scream himself, and with a chain reaction like that, the alarm goes from booth to booth and reaches the patrol. The patrol is an officer with 5 soldiers that make the rounds between booths every night, and make sure that everything's going okay with the guards. If you're caught sleeping or away from your post by these guys, well, RIP. They are also the ones to investigate an alarm. Only problem is that the patrol might take a while to get to the booth that raised the alarm, as they don't know which one it is and they might be far from the right one. They run double time through every booth until they locate the original source of alarm. My dad hears the other guys screaming and he knows that the alarm is raised. He knows that the patrol is going to be there in a few minutes. He also knows that the penalty for falsely raising the alarm is prison. Prison means a soldier gets X amount of days added to their service. The service back then was 2 years plus prison days that have been added to a soldier along the way from penalties. They don't actually lock you up in a cell unless you commit an actual crime. Well, then the military police comes in. But he doesn't have minutes. The eerie figure is 50 meters away and closing. He gets ready to fire, but then he hears, "Relax," my dad's name. It's me. Another soldier covered in a black blanket that my dad knew was trying to sneak back into camp at night, after having fun in the nearest town without permission. He was holding a bottle of liquor too and is fairly drunk. My dad let him through, but he knew that he was about to get a serious amount of prison time for falsely raising the alarm once the patrol figured out that it was his booth that the alarm was raised from. The patrol gets there and my dad doesn't snitch on the drunk guy. The officer tells him that they'll see each other the next morning. Next day in line where the penalties are being announced by the officers, my dad is waiting to hear his name called, but they never mention him. Even though an alarm raised is extremely rare to happen, nobody tells him anything. It turns out the patrol officer and the ghost were buddies. The guy sneaking in told the lieutenant what happened and did not mention my dad. The officer apparently pulled some strings and the whole incident was like it never happened. Memorial Day 2015. My boyfriend at the time and I got an invitation to meet up with some friends who were hanging out at a marina just outside of the city that we lived in. The marina wasn't in the best neighborhood, but the friends that we were meeting and hung out at this spot on the banks of the river a few times before to go camping and canoeing. I had heard from my friends about how the last time they partied here, a guy who had just gotten out of prison ended up joining their campfire, and how it had made for a great story. They had all laughed about it, and it became something of a group inside joke. Tyrone asking them to play Wonderwall on the guitar all night. At every party that I would hear about it, "Hey, remember that time at the marina, Tyrone? Blah blah blah." Everybody would reminisce and cut up about how hilarious the night was. It became somewhat of a tradition for them to go to this place on summer holidays, to enjoy the water and the surrounding nature. Feeling invincible and that nothing bad would happen to us, we decided to join up with our 3 friends for the night. That was sure to be a good story for future parties. And we did get a story to tell, but it wasn't lighthearted like singing campfire songs with a convict. It was something darker, something that we would only talk about in hushed voices at parties after we had had a few, and could brave bringing the memory back to light. It was already dark by the time that we drove the 20 minutes out of the city to meet up with them. Honestly, I was in a sour mood because I had to work early the next morning and I didn't want to be out late. Why we hadn't left hours previously to meet them is beyond me. Knowing that my boyfriend, myself, and our crew of friends, we'd end up drinking on the riverbank until we were too drunk to drive home, fall asleep outside and my phone would die. My alarm wouldn't go off and I'd miss work and get in big trouble. I remember standing in the parking lot once we had arrived and feeling extremely unsettled. I was pouting against the truck of my boyfriend's car and giving him a stern talk, saying, "We can't be out here too late. I have to work tomorrow. If we end up camping here tonight, I'm going to be pissed. I don't even want to be here right now." But since he was the one who had driven us out there and was looking forward to hanging out with friends, I didn't push it. He promised that we wouldn't be out late and that he wouldn't get drunk. I almost demanded that he take me home right then because I felt so uncomfortable being there, but I didn't want to ruin our entire night. At the time, I chalked it up to being in a bad mood and acting like a Debbie Downer. But what ended up happening later told me that I should have listened to my instincts and gotten the heck out of there ASAP. The marina is essentially just a big parking lot with a couple boat launches and a pathway that went into the surrounding woods around the river. It was isolated, poorly lit, and since it was a long holiday weekend, all types of people were out partying in the woods. There were at least 4 other cars in the lot, one of which was our friend's car. We unpacked the car and started walking through the woods on a narrow path with a 6-pack of beer and our phone flashlights to see in the darkness. Our friends were already out on the riverbank with their canoe and they had texted us their location. My boyfriend had also been there before, so I followed his lead. After a few minutes of walking into the woods, we heard 2 guys behind us talking in a slurred speech to each other, saying something to us like, "You guys having a good night?" We assumed that they were just wasted and laughed, responding, "Oh yeah, we're just getting started." They mumbled more to each other incoherently and went off on a different path into the woods with their flashlight. We didn't get a good look at them, but I remember they were wearing gym shorts and cut-off muscle shirts. It had startled me a bit because they seemed to have come out of nowhere, but they didn't seem threatening. We brushed it off and weren't concerned that we had run into other people since we knew we weren't the only ones on the marina. Now it seems that they could have been stalking our movements over the course of the evening because of what was to follow. I'll try to explain the landscape a little more for details that'll be relevant later on. We were directly on a rocky riverbank, so to our one side was water and to our backs was the woods. We had entered the woods from the left end of the parking lot, if you were facing the river, and took a path that eventually forked in the middle. Once you reached the fork, by going down the right path about 50 feet or so, you wound up at our campsite and the riverbank. If you stayed straight in the path, you went deeper into the woods until the path met some fallen trees, really overgrown brush, and it ended. The spot that we had picked had a large, flat, open embankment, but further up, the path pretty much just dropped off into the water, as it was on a steeper part of the hillside. It seemed to us at the time that there was one way in and one way out of the area, and that anyone who went up the path essentially had to walk past where we were all sitting. I'm sure there were other small paths around since the woods weren't super thick, but the one that we took to the water was clearly walked on frequently and often. Finally, we had reached our friends who had laid out a blanket and had already cracked open some beers. We had all intended to row out to a nearby island with the canoe, but we had noticed that some people already had set up camp at that spot and could see their campfire from the shore. Oh well, we figured this was just as good a spot as any to enjoy our evening, and we weren't miffed about the change of plans. We started to relax, had a drink ourselves and smoked some cigarettes, and then talked about starting a fire to keep warm in the cool evening. We gathered some firewood from nearby and explored the path a bit more, not running into any more people for the time being. After we had started a fire and settled in for the night, I tried to cheer up and get out of my crappy mood and enjoy the company of my friends. It was difficult though. I found myself staring down the path and jumping at every little sound or twig cracking in the distance. The guys weren't paying much attention to the surroundings and were talking loudly. They were in their own world. At one point, I distinctly remember my friend's girlfriend leaning over me and saying, "Do you have a weird feeling about tonight? I just feel like something bad is going to happen." It freaked me out because I knew exactly what she was talking about. No matter how many beers I had or how much I tried to distract myself with light conversation, something about the night just felt off. It's like the air was full of electricity and danger. A few minutes later, a group of about 5 men aged 20 to 25 appeared out of the tall weeds and started towards our fire. I could see them squinting in our direction when one of them said, "Is this Joe's party?" I made out some silhouettes of the figures in gym shorts, but I couldn't discern any physical features because of the way the campfire was casting shadows around the trees. They had plastic bags in their hands, which I assumed were full of towels or after-swimming clothes. We all said, No, you got the wrong group." They apologized for bothering us, wished us a good evening, and started back the way that they came. It seemed then that their group split off into 2 different parties though, because after the interaction, 3 of the guys stayed close by the tree line, trying to kick over a stump in the ground, making a ruckus, and 2 more had gone up further up the riverbank with their flashlights. I could see the light dancing off the tree branches in the water, but having walked farther up the path earlier with my boyfriend for firewood, I remembered that the path had turned into a dead end. I waited for the light to start coming back toward our campsite, or the group to walk back to us, heading back toward the parking lot, but they never passed by us again. The 3 guys messing with the stump left after a while, and I figured they went to go find Joe. The flashlight beam disappeared from view, and I stopped thinking about it, turning my attention back to my friends. About 20 minutes passed when our conversation was broken by something that made us all go dead silent. Suddenly, we hear a man about 75 feet away yell loudly, "Hey, what are you doing, man?" And then a sort of shuffle of feet and movement. "Hey, get away from me," he yelled. "What do you think you're doing?" And the sound of something making contact with skin. "No, stop." I could hear a struggle taking place. "Help, somebody help me," followed over and over and over. It then dissolved into what sounded like somebody being attacked. We heard something hitting something. Maybe a fist in the man's body and maybe a blunt weapon or a knife, as he screamed for help. We only heard his voice as the assailant seemed to have surprised the guy and began attacking him without saying anything. He yelled in agony for what seemed like forever until he finally went silent. You could hear his voice weakening. His groaning faded as it seemed he went unconscious or worse. I can never unhear the sound of it to this day. My friend yelled into the distance, "Yo, what the heck?" And it brought us all back to reality. Whatever had just happened had happened just beyond where we were sitting. We had a small fire burning, and we were very clearly visible from the tree line, and 5 of us had just witnessed somebody being brutally attacked. The rushes and weeds near us started rustling, as all chaos broke out on our campsite. We had to leave the area and fast, but we were cornered. We stood up, grabbing bags, shoes, only what was necessary and within reach, and we got ready to run. Someone doused the fire. We couldn't take the pass since that was likely where the attack had just taken place, and somebody was probably about to burst into our campsite and ambush us. I didn't dare look behind me. The canoe, it was the only way out. We started pushing it out into the water in a panic. I got in first, uncontrollably shaking and sobbing. My boyfriend had sense enough to grab my purse and handed it to me, as he helped my hand get the canoe far enough away from the shore so we could push off. My friend's girlfriend was holding me, trying to calm me down, but I was too afraid to move or speak. Everybody else was silent with straight fear written all over their faces. With 5 grown adults in a small canoe, all I could picture was the boat capsizing, or somebody picking us off from shore with a gun. We paddled out into the middle of the river and watched our campsite disappear around the bend. Once we felt out of threat of immediate danger, I called 911 from the boat and shakily told the police what we think had just happened. The cop on the line was impatient and tense, only saying that they had already gotten a call about the situation, and he had hung up on me. As we floated down the river, the boat launch in the marina came into view. We could see from the water that the parking lot was alive with ambulances and police cars. We hurriedly had docked the boat and climbed out, carrying the canoe up the ramp. No one stopped us to ask any questions or even noticed us. A frightened group of hippies conspicuously dragging a canoe behind them. I saw some cops walking down the pathway that led to the river with flashlights, but they weren't moving with any sense of urgency. A couple guys were talking with officers at the ambulance with their shirts off, wearing gym shorts or swim trunks, but we couldn't tell if it was members of the group that had walked by our campsite, claiming to be looking for Joe. But I assumed they had to have been since the incident happened shortly after we had all crossed paths. Strangely, no one appeared to be injured. The ambulance cab was empty. No one was in handcuffs and everybody just seemed to be talking calmly. Something was off, but we didn't stick around to find out if they had found anything in the woods. We looked for news stories for weeks after the fact and found nothing about the incident. No victim, no attacker, nothing. Were we in the wrong place at the wrong time? What happened to the guy who was attacked, or was he faking it all just to mess with us? We were almost victimized by a group of dangerous youth that had scoped us out, seeing us as an easy target. We speculated that this could have been an attempt to lure us into the woods, to jump us, among many other possibilities. But we never had any answers about what had happened in the woods that night. The next day, some of the group went back to gather up supplies that we had left behind in our panic. They didn't find anything stolen or strange in the path near where this had happened. I have never been back to the marina, and a group of friends has since dissolved and moved off to different parts of the world. We had went out looking for an evening of fun and got more than we had bargained for. I was personally traumatized for weeks. Any sudden noises or surprises sent me into a fit of panic, sobs, and shaking. Eventually, I was able to stop hearing a man scream for his life every time that I closed my eyes.